1973, the global economy was given a huge shock by the decision of OPEC to hike oil price by a massive 300%. The Indian economy, already hit by the 1971 war and refugee crisis, took a hard blow. Globally, the Cold War was at its height, and nations not in strategic alliance with the US were being targeted all around. During this time, leaders of Chile and Bangladesh were physically eliminated. In India too, mass mobilization was engineered, and in states like Bihar and Gujarat, elected governments were forced out of office mid-term. This was followed by a violent nationwide railway strike.
George Fernandez, a fiery trade unionist who had great influence on the railway workers, the largest central government workforce in the country, and he called for a railway strike. When the strike began, the government tried to deal with it heavy-handedly. There were many lathi charges, tear gas shells bursting all over the places, and finally shootings, rifle shootings, in which about 50 people, I think, were killed. So all over India, particularly western and northern India, conflagrations, and ordinary people found it very difficult to carry on with their lives.
In this political climate, on June 25, 1975, the Allahabad High Court unseated the Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, on charges of electoral malpractice. The specific charges were: she had used resources of the state government for deploying the sound systems for 2 election rallies in Uttar Pradesh. There was a delay in notifying in the official gazette that her secretary, Yashpal Kapoor, was appointed her election agent. The High Court granted her a stay order, and on appeal, the Supreme Court acquitted her of all charges in November 1975. However, on the evening of June 25th, the opposition held a huge rally at the Ramlila Maidan in Delhi, where the socialist leader Jayaprakash Narayan called upon the police and the military to disobey government orders. On the morning of June 26th, the Prime Minister announced the decision to impose emergency in a broadcast to the nation.
भाइयों और बहनों, राष्ट्रपति जी ने आपातकाल की घोषणा की है। इससे आतंकित होने का कोई कारण नहीं है। आप सभी गहरे और व्यापक षड्यंत्र से अवगत होंगे जो उस समय से रचा जा रहा है जब से मैंने भारत के जनसाधारण के लाभ के लिए कुछ प्रगतिशील उपाय करने शुरू किए।
Talked to your people of a deep and widespread conspiracy of which you were sure they were aware. What conspiracy?
Well, it's obvious, isn't it? Now the whole subcontinent has been destabilized.
But this was an internal upheaval you were warning.
No, it was both. It was supported from outside.
But you required the special powers on the basis of internal upheaval.
But no, the question was, had it been only internal with no foreign interference, one could have dealt with it in a much easier way.
But you didn't even mention, with respect, well, you didn't mention
no, why should one mention everything? No, one doesn't mention everything at any time. Why should one?
Could I?
But it's very obvious when people have followed the doings of international agencies and who was present at India at what time. And what is happening today is borne out everything that we suspected earlier.
On the 26th June 1975, I was working at the time at Amrit Bajar Patrika in Calcutta. Our managing director was Tarun Kanti Ghosh, who was also the Commerce and Industry Minister in the West Bengal government led by Siddhartha Shankar Ray. He called us for a meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning at Writers' Building, where the government sat. We are told not to speak to our sources over the telephone because each telephone was being tapped by the police. A sense of great fear had gripped the whole country. people were not talking to each other. They were not talking anywhere in public.
This was followed by a period of 21 months during which hundreds of thousands of political leaders and activists, as well as some editors and journalists, were imprisoned under the emergency provisions of the Maintenance of Internal Security Act. Many of the provisions of the Constitution were put on hold and some amendments were made, including the amendment to the preamble of the Constitution by the inclusion of the terms socialist and secular republic. Stormtroopers of apparent extra-constitutional authorities like Sanjay Gandhi, the Prime Minister's son, engaged in repressive measures like sun clearance and mass sterilization.
Do you accept no responsibility at all?
I have accepted all responsibility because I happen to be head of the government.
Although the tenure of Parliament was extended by a year, in January 1977, Mrs. Gandhi suddenly announced general elections and released all political prisoners. The Congress party was routed in these elections and Mrs. Gandhi herself lost her seat at Rai Bareli.
Democracy is basically of two types. A genuine democracy where people are not afraid of their governments. They tell their stories without fear. But there are democracies where even despite being elected by the people, the governments behave as if they were alien forces, powers, and they would not trust their own people. Like what may have been happening now.
I'm saying today there is a state of emergency. It is not legal, it is not constitutional, it doesn't have parliamentary sanction. But in every other way there is a state of emergency. You have only to go and walk the streets of Delhi today, or Calcutta, or any city. And whereas that time, only those who were in fear, who were doing something antisocial. But today it is the common citizen, the poor man who is in fear.
Following a period of intense victimization for 2 years, during which Mrs. Gandhi was arrested twice, she won a resounding victory in the 1980 general elections and was back as Prime Minister, which office she held till the last day of her life.